Hey guys, it's Goosebumps Completionist, and today I'm bringing you another book review from the classic original 62 books. And it's book number 19, Deep Trouble. To preface this, this is the second time I've ever read this book in my life. The last time I read this book, I was probably 8 or 9 years old. So it's been quite a long time since I've read this book. And I can remember, after reading it that one time, when I was a kid, this was one of my least favorite Goosebumps books. And I couldn't really remember why. I just thought that this cover was kind of clickbaity, and it's probably one of the more infamous Goosebumps covers ever because, you know, people think you're buying into a shark book, but you're not getting that. It's one of those covers that lie to you type of situations. And I remember hearing some similar responses from kids when I tried to talk to them about this book. So I thought, you know, this book wasn't really worth rereading. So when I got back into Goosebumps when I was in middle school, and around the age of 13 or so, when the Cartoon Network re-airings of the old TV show came back, brought back the show, I still skipped this book. And I disliked this book so much, I never read this Deep Trouble 2, and that's one of the last two of the original 62 books I have yet to read. So, yeah, me and this book don't have a good history. But rereading it as an adult, I have to say that I think this book is one of those over-hated books. I've said this in the past about books like Why I'm Afraid of Bees and Return to Ghost Camp. I think this book is a little bit overhated. Is it the greatest thing ever? No. But this book was kind of surprising, very easy to read, very well written, probably one of the better written Goosebumps books out there. I have big issues with it. We'll get into that near the end of the video, but off the bat, if you haven't tried the original Deep Trouble here, I would go out of my way to recommend this. Not all the way out, but I would, you know, say go try this. Maybe you might like it a little bit more than I did. But I want to say what I want to say for the end of the video. So, without further ado, let's get into the plot overview without giving too much away. So, the book starts off about this, with this kid named Billy. And he's professing to the reader in his monologue, and you'll see this throughout the book. Billy is kind of an imaginative type, and he likes to daydream and plug himself into an alter ego. And he is pretending to be this, you know, adventurer guy that's in the oceans, you know, looking for, you know, monsters or whatnot. And that's essentially the first chapter. Then the second chapter kind of snaps you back into reality a little bit. And you get to meet Billy's sister Sheena. And you get some backstory of what they're doing. So the two kids, Billy and Sheena, are visiting their uncle named Dr. Deep. Their last name, they share the last name as well, in the Caribbean, off the coast of this island called Alondra, and they're observing this coral reef. And they're actually on this boat throughout the whole book called the Cassandra, and it's just them two, their uncle, and the uncle's assistant Alexander. And they're out there just observing wildlife, doing their uncle and his assistant are doing wildlife research. They're like ocean biologists, I think, and they have a bunch of fish tanks on board and stuff. And one of the best activities to do off the coast of Alondra is to go snorkeling and examine these reefs. And you get this sense that, get a little bit of backstory with the kids and the relationship of Dr. Deep and how, you know, they really only go visit him in the summer because why not go to the Caribbean in the summer, you know, while he's doing research. So it's kind of a cool setting and atmosphere, and it gets you hooked on that, especially if you've been to the Caribbean before, like me. I can really picture that, and it gets me in the mood reading the story off the bat. And Billy decides to go, you know, snorkeling. And he's been told by his uncle not to venture out into a certain part of the reef because it's too dangerous. And he's observing the fish, and he sees these blue and yellow fish in the coral. And he ventures off to the red coral that he's told not to mess with. And he gets something slimy, tentacly, wrapping around him. And he said it's like an octopus, but with like 12 legs, which is really scary. You know, this part of the book, anything to do with water or deep sea monsters gets to me so bad. And this part really petrified me. So Billy's like getting sucked underneath the ocean. And he's flailing around, and finally his uncle and Sheena come to rescue him and pull him out. He's lost his flippers and his snorkel's all messed up. He's like, there was a sea monster, you gotta believe me. And it goes into a little bit of you gotta believe me with Billy. But, you know, Sheena's like, those things don't exist. But his uncle is like, you know, you can't really write that stuff off, right? So after they see that Billy's okay, they go back to the boat, but Billy decides to race his sister and has a brush in with the red coral, which he scrapes against his foot and makes his foot burn. He gets back on board. Alexander and his uncle looks at his foot. He's like, you're lucky you didn't get punctured, because that coral has poison in it, and you could have, if you got it in your bloodstream, you could have been poisoned to death. So Billy had a close call, and he keeps maintaining the story that he saw this monster, and they're like, cut it out, you know, this stuff doesn't exist. But then Dr. D kind of says, you know, kind of reminds Sheena and Billy that you just don't know what's out there. So Billy gets his idea that he wants to go out on his own and, you know, find this monster to prove to his sister and uncle that this thing exists. So the story gets into kind of banter territory where, you know, they're talking about, you know, eating for lunch, what they're eating for lunch and dinner, and talking about how Alexander's not the best cook in the world. And Billy gets this opportunity that he might, you know, want to take. And so one day he gets up and he wants to go and, you know, find this monster. Well, he overhears some information. He hears in the other room that his uncle is talking to these two, you know, this couple that owns a zoo that have come to visit him on the Cassandra. And you know, while the door is shut, he overhears a conversation about them talking about mermaids. And this is probably the point of the book where most people get really upset. Because, you know, like I said earlier, you think you're getting a shark book, but we get a mermaid story instead. But hear me out. So he overhears this conversation where the couple offers, you know, Dr. Deep $1 million to recover a mermaid. You know, they've heard rumors and they trust in these rumors that there's a mermaid off the coast of Alondra. And there's kind of an illusion that that's exactly why Dr. Deep and Alexander are there. They're actually there hunting for a mermaid. And they can use the money for their research because they're underfunded, which is, you know, a typical, you know, not really the most typical trope, you know, for science in books, but, you know, in this case, in field research, they are underfunded by the university they work for, or whatever they're you know, usually contracted to do research for. So this money could really help them. So Dr. Deep agrees. And then Billy busts in and catches them off guard, and they're like, hey, I thought we were going to keep this thing a secret. You got to trust me. You got to tell me that you trust Billy, that he'll keep this a secret. And Dr. Deep is like, yeah, and Alexander is there too. And he's like, oh yeah, we'll keep it a secret. And Billy is told not to even tell Sheena about it. So Billy feels happy that he has a secret that he can't tell Sheena. Because Sheena's kind of, you know, always scoffing at him, saying that these things don't exist, and or his imagination gets the best of him. So Billy feels like he has the upper hand. So, you know, pretty not too far after that, Billy sees an opportunity to go out, you know, early in the morning the next day. And he's like, I'm going to go and I'm going to venture out and try to do some mermaid hunting. Because how cool would it be if I'm the one that finds the mermaid? Well, his sister Sheena catches up to him and says, hey, look, you know, you shouldn't be, you know, doing this stuff. And Billy's like, yeah, you caught me, you know, I'm crazy. Because, you know, she's like, what are you doing up this early? Are you crazy? You're not supposed to be snorkeling in the water. He's like, maybe I am crazy. And he has like a little excuse to tell her. And he says, because I'm crazy, I'm still going to go out there and just do some snorkeling. And Sheena kind of falls back a little bit. And Billy goes and snorkels. And this is where you finally see what you see on the cover, the Hammerhead scene. It's very brief, but he sees something splashing over close to the island of Alondra. So he heads over there and he discovers a shark fin, and it's a hammerhead shark. And for about a chapter or two, it's very thrilling to see him interacting with this hammerhead shark. And he's pretty much, gets bitten by this shark, right? And he feels like he's about to, become shark food. Well, something saves him. And it turns out a mermaid saves him. A very pretty blonde-haired mermaid saves him, thwarts the shark. The shark scampers off. And, Billy was making cries for help, but then he just stopped all of a sudden to examine the mermaid, who's making all these eek noises, kind of like how dolphins or whales do, like making like sonar noises. And he's enamored by her and realizes that there's something else that happened in the book a little bit earlier where he felt he was being tickled underwater. He's like, you must have been the one trying to tickle me. And he's like, I want to thank you. Is there anything I can do for you? And before she leaves and before, he can figure out something to do for her, a net drops over them. And it's Dr. D and Alexander who have netted them. And Billy's like, hey, you're hurting her. You're hurting me. And they're like, Billy, what you just found is insane. We have a real life mermaid here. And Sheena's in disbelief. This is the first time Sheena's heard of this stuff. So they're all freaking out. They're like, they made the discovery of a lifetime, which is, pretty much the truth. Because as much as this book is shrouded in realism, mermaids are more like a mythical creature, right? That you hear in old tales across the world. But to actually find a living one can finally maybe connect mankind to something, far more deeper of understanding than they knew before on a scientific level. So they want to, keep the mermaid as a specimen. But Billy knows what's up. He's like, look, you gotta promise you can't hurt her. And Dr. Deep is like, I promise you, we're just gonna run some tests. She'll be all right. So they get this big tank on the boat and they put her in the tank with salt water. And and they immediately notice that the mermaid is having some emotional distress. And Billy feels really sad about it. Dr. Deep, Sheena, and Alexander all feel sympathy because they understand, like she's a sentient being, right? So it goes into this, obvious layer of commentary about, caging animals, right? The ethical side of caging animals. It brings that to light. Sentient, most of the time you don't consider animals sentient beings, but they are, right? And a mermaid, it looks human with a fish appendage. So there's obvious connections that they are feeling emotional pain and can convey that. And the sucky side of it is that since it's such a new discovery, there has to be research into this relationship to understand how they eat, how they communicate, maybe how they reproduce, how mankind can communicate with them. There's a whole bunch of stuff involved with that. So it's a pretty layered ethical topic going on in the book, which I can appreciate, even though the mermaid stuff isn't, really what I was hoping for, but it's good. Anyways, on the boat, Dr. Deep says he's going to go venture off to find some variety of foods from a nearby inhabited island that maybe they can get the mermaid to eat. So, Alexander, being the bad cook he is, offers some lunch to Billy, which is like some squid. And Billy's like, I'm not going to eat this stuff. I don't like his food. So he feeds it to the mermaid, and she likes it, and Alexander's making notes of it. And they have a good little chuckle, and they're like, this is going to be great, and everything. And they're examining the mermaid a little more. Then Dr. Deep comes back, and he tells Sheena and Billy to go to bed early. And they're like, why do we got to go to bed early? And he's like, because you got up early this morning, I want to thank you for the mermaid discovery. And Billy's like, well, how long are we going to be able to hold her? He's like, I'll take care of her. I'll monitor throughout the night. You just go get some rest. So Billy's like, okay, You know, he has a good peace of mind, and he's like, well, now we found the mermaid, but he's, you know, questioning the morals of it. He's like, she shouldn't be in there. I want to free her. This shouldn't be happening. And he actually kind of tried to, but failed at it. So Billy's like, you know what? I'm going to go out tonight and make sure that she's all right. You know, because he's questioning his morals, right? But he hears a boat pull up, hears a boat motor, and he hears something pull up, and there's a skirmish on the deck. And he goes to investigate, and he sees that his uncle has been knocked out, and there's 4 masked intruders, you know, trying to put a net down and take the mermaid out of the tank. And Billy's like dumbfounded. He's like, what's going on? And the guys are like telling him to get lost. And, you know, they're making a big commotion. And he's calling for Alexander, calling for Sheena. And Sheena shows up, but Alexander's nowhere to be found. And then there's a big reveal about Alexander. And he may or may not be behind this ambush. And if there is any motives, I'm not going to spoil them here. But let's just say the mermaid gets taken off the boat. And Dr. Deep finally, you know, awakens. But all 3 of them get thrown into the tank that the mermaid was in. And pretty much sent overboard to die in the tank to drown. And there's a big drowning scene where they all have to try to escape. And they manage to do so and get back onto the boat. And they realize that, you know, while they're in the tank, that there may be more than just one mermaid. And they've gone off and formed a formation, and they're using sonar to kind of find out where the other mermaid is and where the boat that left with the mermaid has gone to. So they see the mermaids going off, and they feel this instinct to go follow them, so they hop in the dinghy boat and go follow the mermaids. And they end up finding a parked boat with the mermaid and Alexander, potentially, and maybe some of the robbers. And something happens there. A big old climactic event happens. And something may or may not happen with the mermaids dealing with the boat, even though we don't really get to see the result of what happens. We just see what happens to the boat. And Billy, Sheena, and Dr. Deep presumably make it out there fine. Well, the next day comes, and this is where the twist ending comes in. I wouldn't even say this is a twist ending, but essentially the ending comes in where the 2 zoo couple people come back after, you know, hearing word from Dr. Deep, and they ask Dr. Deep about the mermaid, and he chooses to, you know, give them partial information, and something happens out of that. And then the ending involves Billy out in the ocean exploring, and something happens. Very reminiscent to the beginning of the book. And that's essentially Deep Trouble in a nutshell. So yeah, Deep Trouble. Okay, let's start off with the positives. For one, I really enjoyed Billy Deep, the main character of this book. His monologue was very rich. He felt very honest. He had some, you know, quirks to him. He was quick with jokes. He was adventurous. He had bravery to him. He had morals, and the plot really brought out his morality, and exploring that stuff was very fresh for Goosebumps. You know, sometimes you get stories like that, exploring morals. But this one went into the whole, you know, ethics of, you know, capturing animals and, you know, keeping them caged and stuff. So, yeah, that was pretty touching to see with this character. He did get kind of annoying at times with the "you gotta believe me," and it's very slight. "You gotta believe me." It's not something that's overdone. Like, I don't mind it as long as it's not overdone. But it was fine. I mean, he was very opinionated. Like I said, very brave, very forthright. He's a great character. Sheena, you know, a good sibling protagonist. Not the greatest character, but she was fine. Dr. Deep was a really good parent protagonist. You know, see a proactive parent, or I guess guardian in the story, was very cool to read. I like what the book had to say about his character. And yeah, the atmosphere was excellent. The Caribbean is a fun place and setting for a Goosebumps story. the deep water stuff got to me, like the stuff with the tentacle monster in the beginning really bothered me in a good way. That was actually petrifying to me. Like I said, in the past, I have thalassophobia, the fear of deep water, and deep sea creatures. So that got to me a little bit. And, you know, there's some other tense scenes with the sharks and stuff. That was good. But yeah, mainly the biggest thing I can give this book is like, you know, the writing was just to the point. It's a linear story, not a lot of hopping around too much. It's, you know, it tells a timeline, and it goes into, you know, not too much banter, but there's banter there. There's some exposition, character building, character development, you know, a themed story. So, you know, on paper, there's a lot I would want in a Goosebumps book in this book. And it delivers on a good amount of that stuff. So that's also well appreciated. And also, I like the way you know, Dr. Deep handles the situation in the ending. It felt, like I said, it's playing on those morals, and it felt like it was the right thing to do. It just feels like a whole story, right? It just feels like, I wouldn't say whole, but a wholesome story, right? So it makes you feel good a little bit. And then, if I didn't mention Alexander, him, you know, this is kind of spoiler-ish, but him being, you know, like a monkey wrench, or, you know, in the grand scheme of the story, was kind of cool, you know, to see like you know, a good person going bad. Really cool concept. All right, but the negatives, okay, I have a few medium ones that kind of add up here. The first one being, there's, like I said, the point in the story where we start getting into the mermaid stuff, right? On one hand, it's good for what it is, right? But it just comes off so tangenty in the story. You get what I'm saying? The whole mermaid stuff, in my opinion, feels like a big tangent to the story. I mean, yeah, it's what happens, right? But I was hoping that it would go into Billy trying to, you know, prove that the squid monster exists, and going to explore the coral reefs more, going to explore the depths of the sea more, maybe go into more of that. But then you get Mermaids. It comes out of left field, and while it's not necessarily the worst thing ever, I just don't think that, you know, that was, I guess, the best direction to go with this. There's so many avenues you could have taken with a deep sea adventure story, and you have a shark on the cover, and you go with mermaids. I mean, like I said, it's not a total wash. I mean, it's well told for what it is. It's just not something I would care to see normally. It's not something I would request for if I had options here to choose from. You know what I mean? So, yeah, it's like I said, it just comes off like a big old tangent kind of thing. And then getting to, you know, the climax of the story. The climax, right? We see these mermaids messing with this boat that these robbers are on, right? But we never get to figure out what happens to these robbers, who are presumably still nearby the boat. And by the ending, the Cassandra is still parked in the same area by Elandra. So it wouldn't make any sense if you got robbed, you know, got assaulted by robbers and stuff, that you would park in the same exact spot in case they were okay. They would come find you. There's some logical things in the story that, you know, I guess, you know, I wouldn't know what the situation would be like, but I would imagine that you would at least try to move your boat, or, you know, go to safety on an island where there's people there, so that way there could be witnesses if the people try to mess with you, but they didn't do that. So, you know, just kind of little things there, kind of questionable. And, you know, I guess the last negative I have with the story is that this book isn't really all that scary. Minus the couple of scenes that got to me personally, this feels like if you took the 13th Year from Disney Channel, the Disney Channel original movie, you know, the story with the mermaids and the body horror about him turning 13 and getting scales and, you know, growing stuff on his body, right? If you took that story and blended it with Free Willy, That's essentially this book, except without the body horror from 13th Year. It's like Free Willy, but with mermaids. And it just comes across like a family-friendly 20th Century Fox 90s movie than a Goosebumps book. It just comes off like a more adventure-focused story than a horror story. And some people like the more adventurous Goosebumps books. I do see a lot of praise from people for this book. You know, this is a divisive one, but some people really like the Deep Trouble book. Some people really like How I Got My Shrunken Head, or The Abominable Snowman of Pasadena. You know, the more adventurous stories with setting changes and stuff. But to me, this just, how is this kid's horror? It could have been scarier than what it was. It was trying to tell a more moralistic story, which is, I guess, you know, it gives it a bigger pass for me because, you know, it was well written and it has its morals. You know, I have gave credit where credit was due to How I Learned to Fly in the past, and I do give it credit where it's due. But to me, this is just like it comes even more family friendly than How I Learned to Fly in some areas, minus the shark biting stuff and the tentacle monster stuff. But I don't know. It just reminds me, like I said, of Free Willy and the 13th Year combined, and I can't get that stigma out of my head about this book. But yeah, from a 0 to 5 star basis, I didn't love this book, so I'm not going to give it a 4.5 or higher. And in terms of like it being like a B tier, honestly, I was struggling considering this a B tier book because the stuff in it, you know, isn't terrible. But, you know, like I said, there's some logical issues. The whole mermaid stuff feeling like a tangent and it feeling like Free Willy with mermaids. I wasn't really all that impressed with it, to be honest. And I was on the fence between like a 3.8 to a 3.9, which I think is fair. It's not as flawed as some other C tiers, but I think it deserves that C tier. So I settled with all the problems I have, which were kind of medium ones. They added up to being like 1.1 points off the top, and I gave this book a 3.9 out of 5, which is a C+. It's very close to being a B tier book. I just think if the, you know, if the deep sea exploration bits were better, or if there was more of it, this was only 117 pages, right? If they would have added a chapter or two of going more down under the water more and exploring the lagoon area they keep mentioning and the coral reefs, and maybe even go on to the island of Balandra, explore a little more. They're being stuck on the boat and talking about mermaids. I probably would have given this a B. But, you know, that's a woulda, coulda, shoulda type of thing, you know. For what it is, it's a good book. It's overhated. Very close to being a B tier, like I said, but doesn't quite make it there for me. So, yeah, and that's my thoughts on Deep Trouble. Let me know down in the comment section down below. Do you love this book? Do you hate this book? I'm dying to know. And I'll see you next time.